Okay, folks, we are live here for Unfound on the Ground. Number 16. As always, I'm here a little bit early to make sure my technology's in order. So if you're watching this early, just bear with me. Let me get some of the usual aspects out of the way. And I'm getting the disclaimers posted. Last time I tried to do this before I went live, and I don't think the text showed. So that is what it is. This time through, I'm not going to run into that problem, though. Of course, I'll read through it like usual. And so this is Unfound on the Ground number 16, Genealogical Research for Missing Persons Cases. We're not started just yet. I'm here early like usual. When you watch this recording, you'll know if you've watched any of them from before. There are this short time before where I get here early and go ahead and take care of some of the technical materials. So this is a little bit of preliminary programming. We have an exciting episode tonight, genealogical research for missing persons cases. So I'll wait till 8:15 Eastern time. It's 6:15 Mountain time where I'm located in North Dakota. 7 p.m. Central Time if you're watching there, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. So we still have about 13 minutes. So last time I tried before I went live, to put the disclaimer material in the chat, and I just don't think it carried over when I watched the review. Of course, I vocalized that, as folks know, but I'd like to have that up. Since we switched to using YouTube Live from Zoom, of course, you can always look at pros and cons, but one of the pros is I could post certain things real time, including the text of the usual explanations, notifications, and certain disclaimers that we typically use. So I have that. And so we're waiting. We still have about 12 minutes. So I'm going to close that out. So tonight we were scheduled trying a new night out. So we still have about about 7 minutes. 7 minutes. And so and I like to get in here early to make sure I have the camera set up right and that the microphone is working properly and so forth. And tonight of the 15 that we've done so far, we've covered a number of very important topics pertaining to missing persons cases. We have touched upon some things in the past that pertain to research. Covered a lot of ground that pertains to research in an ongoing way, and in terms of certain research resources and analysis. Certainly in those earlier episodes, we had covered a lot of material with some mention of genealogy. And actually, as I'll mention tonight, when we talk about forensic genealogy, of course, that's part of it. I'll say a little bit about that tonight. While we're here, I might as well get this posted too. I'll make mention of the unfoundpodcast.com. If you're watching this video, please go ahead and visit that website and share that link. That's really a great resource. Of course, I have the data gems up there. I'll say some things about that. And so tonight we will go through, like usual, the guiding questions that we have. We have our what is genealogical research? What does genealogical research entail? How can it help with the solving of missing persons cases? And what are some resources for genealogical research? So we have that out there. And so we have some just going to get a few items posted early here by way of feed in. Going now. So again, if you're watching this, eventually once we distribute this material, and as folks know, we have a schedule in which these episodes are made, and then they're distributed by Ed through Unfound on the YouTube channel, and then we do what we can to promote it. So if you're watching the recording, obviously we'll be starting here in about 4 minutes. Please watch this, and then if you're so inclined, share this episode, Unfound on the Ground number 16. Some of our participants will be showing up soon, and then we'll begin for sure. So if you're watching this video when it is released, again, as you know, I get in here early sometimes to make sure everything's in order. Hopefully you enjoy these if you watched a few. And this is hard to believe we're on number 16 now. Hello, Charlotte. Welcome. We have about 3 minutes till we officially begin. I try to get in here a little bit early to make sure everything's in order. Get some of the disclaimer material up and some of the initial material that we're working with. And so we have about 2 minutes. This is a topic we hear a lot about: genealogy, amateur genealogy, and certainly its connection to solving crimes, genealogy in general, and sometimes amateur genealogy has played a role in that. Charlotte, are you interested in genealogy? And again, folks, type at your own pace. I know everyone's types at a different pace or might be occupied. Yes, great. Outstanding. Outstanding. Well, hopefully tonight, and maybe you'll have some resources to contribute. Linda, how are you? Good to see you, Linda. Linda, are you interested in genealogy? Have you done any family history research? We got about a minute, folks. Nothing. This was just my preliminary. I get here early just to make sure all the Paula, how are you? Linda, you didn't miss anything substantial. I get here early, try to make sure all the technology's in order, maybe get some things posted. Great. Well, hopefully tonight you might get some resources that could be helpful. Again, hello to Charlotte, Linda, Paula. We have about a minute. So this is sort of that pre-phase when I get here early. So just to make sure everything's in order, and so that once the time hits, we can get things going. So we are here. Welcome, folks, to Unfound on the Ground, number 16, Genealogical Research for Missing Persons Cases. Again, this is number 16. We'll be recording video and audio, including the text chat. Chat participation's an option. For the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound, the audio and video recording, including text chat, of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the rendering of your words for journalistic, promotional, and/or commercial purposes with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. As always, thanks to our hello, LaFord girl. As always, thanks to our think tank folks for their participation. Don't forget, and I've posted that as a reminder, theunfoundpodcast.com. That's the website, which we should be quite familiar with. But those of you who are watching this eventually, when it's distributed, go to that website, share that website. We also have that data gem section, which of course is not up to date, which is my fault primarily. However, since we've shifted to some of this to using YouTube Live, I am able to post a lot of our resource links. Kathy, hello, welcome. We have a great group of folks here tonight, some really insightful people. So we're, as always, okay, CC Moore, and I'm going to just note that name. And there's a lot of good material out there, so please continue to save the share the information that you have. Okay, so great, Charlotte. Great. So accuracy, as always, is important. That's something we value. Unfound values. We're discussing things that can be helpful if you're doing any sort of journalistic endeavor or following cases or doing advocacy. And of course, if you're interested in your own genealogy beyond any sort of missing persons case, there's certainly things tonight that we're discussing that could be helpful. So, we know that, and we've heard, and I posted some news and overview stories there, maybe with some opinion mixed in, but from the LA Times, Los Angeles Times, and CNN, what's probably familiar with us recently is the when they caught up with the Golden State Killer, there was a genealogical component to that, and that's certainly not the only case that we could cite, but certainly that's something that's been in the news in recent years. That was, of course, not an example, right? We're talking whether we're dealing with cold case murders, missing persons cases, and so forth. The resource that's mentioned there, and GEDmatch, Linda, my aunt, had done a genealogy on my father's side of the family going back to Ireland, 1779. Wow. That's actually something good to keep in mind if you're going to do, and of course now we're talking about our own, but even if you were to utilize genealogy for a missing persons case, it would make sense to find out what work's been done. We'll talk a little bit about that, but certainly if you're doing your own and you're doing networking in the family, it's good to find out what people have done so you can build off of that. I will say on the front end, when we're talking about genealogy, certainly this comes up for these cases, cold cases, and so forth. There's a lot of talk about DNA. As I may have mentioned in previous episodes, the DNA is not something I've done yet. It is something I'm considering, maybe more than I used to. It's become a big deal through the various genealogy sites, Ancestry and others, to do that. I know people have some legitimate concerns about it, but it certainly can be a viable resource. So that's a big deal. Like with that GEDmatch site, gedmatch.com, and others, right? Obviously, usually unless someone is talking about things outside of the context, usually to have access to those DNA databases, you have to do that, right, and participate. So for instance, on ancestry.com, DNA, you have to do that to get that information. And although they provide information and people might share it otherwise, but that's how that works on those sites. Disclaimers here on the front end. Well, we'll get to that. So DNA. Has anyone here done the DNA yet? And again, if you want to share, you don't have to share, but if you're willing to share. Again, it's something I'm thinking more about. I am aware, I've talked to some people who, just in terms of genealogy, who've made some important discoveries through it. And I'm someone who's pretty well researched and know how to do the documents and the networking and all that, but it is something to add to the mix. Now, again, when we talk about, let's get to missing persons cases here and then crimes in general. And of course, I refer back to a recent episode where we talked about forensic science for missing persons cases. Certainly there's the sort of broad realm of forensic genealogy. That, of course, involves the DNA, not exclusively, of course. When we talk about genealogy, we're talking about family history research. Okay, Kathy. Yes, my daughter and I did it for Ancestry just recently, per my little sister's request. Okay, so I guess you either are waiting for or you got the results, and by Kathy, now you know what I'm talking about, that's what gives you access to the specifically DNA databases, and that's where you can see, right? So to the extent that other people have done DNA is when you're going to see those connections, right, as people share information. Okay. So we talk about genealogy, we're talking about family history research, okay? There are people that do that professionally. There are people who do that as amateurs. I consider myself a somewhat knowledgeable amateur genealogist. Granted, the internet, old school and new school are important for this. The internet, the digital age has provided a lot, but you still have to do good research and be willing to network and sometimes go to libraries or city county buildings or cemeteries or whatever. But certainly the digital age has provided a lot of resources and awareness. Kathy, my sister did her DNA a while back, but of course I don't have my results yet. Okay, so you'll see. And again, this is something that I'm thinking of doing. So when we talk about forensic genealogy, that would entail, right? Obviously DNA is big, but it's the documents, it's the connections, it's everything that goes with genealogical research as applied to forensic work. And again, I refer back to my recent episode on that. I do have a couple resources here. And by the way, one disclaimer tonight: when we talk about different sites or commenters or advocates or resources, right? I'm not, nor is Unfound, necessarily endorsing any particular political, philosophical, religious, etc. point of view. We're dealing with helpful reference materials. So when we talk about, or we're not endorsing any, or Unfound's not endorsing any particular business or anything. It's just sharing helpful resources. There are a range of materials that people deal with when they're dealing with forensic genealogy. I'm thinking, and it's interesting, and I may have mentioned this in a previous. By the way, the lady that's featuring some material there in that video, that guest about that path to doing forensic genealogy, she does have a good website with genealogy resources, that Lisa Louise Cook, or Cook, KOOKE.com, Lisa Louise Cook, I'll say, .com, I'll assume. You have that there in the chat. LisaLouiseCooke.com. I myself, this is amateur. I could talk about amateur genealogy for 5 hours, right? So that's not what we're doing. Don't worry. It's even the kind of topic that I have been so involved with, even in my public speaking classes, and I do a sample speech for students in terms of building a speech, typically with an informative speech example, and a go-to topic that I'll use and work with the students on as sort of a walkthrough topic is amateur genealogy as a hobby. So it's something I love talking about from a cold case journalist standpoint, in terms of freelance journalism, research. It's a very important area to consider. We've talked about this before. When you are looking at a missing persons case, of course, you have to consider, and I've mentioned in the past, the idea of building a genealogical profile or profiles. Of course, depending on the type of case you're dealing with, right? If you're dealing with a case that's going back 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years or more, okay, versus a case that's, more recent, when whether it be that missing person or certain family members, friends, and so forth, are or could be still alive. Regardless, the genealogical research is still going to be helpful. Remember, when you're using the genealogy website, for instance, Ancestry.com or others that we'll mention, that you're obtaining information that would still point in the direction of some currently relevant information. If you're trying to even find somebody that might be pertinent to a case that you want to talk to or just want to know more about, if you've used any of those genealogy sites, and please chime in if you have, you'll see that they're giving information. For instance, on Ancestry, at least Ancestry.com, right? There's so many in their database, right? There's so many resources, and so you might also get a public information database section where they're collecting, address and so forth from over the last 20, 30 years. But if you have that information and you're trying to find someone, or at least paint a picture of someone's journeys, right? That could be helpful. There was a case, and I can't get into the specific case because the person with whom that I was working and really am still working with, we're navigating some of that discussion, certain things off the record, certain things deep background. But there was someone who, they're a family member of the missing, and they are looking, there's someone that they were looking to find who was significant for the missing person's life, and might have been and might even still be significant for learning more about why that person and how that person went missing, maybe. But the person was really significant. Now, they had some information. They knew that okay, it's important maybe to talk to this person. Having information that we knew, we were able to track that person down, and there was able to be some communication about the missing person, some other things that were sort of relevant to the family about the missing, even if it's not directly related to the incident. But, I would say that when I had found that person to talk to about the missing and other things related to that, the genealogy databases were helpful. If you have an idea of where someone lived or might have lived at a time, and you have some sense, if you know a little bit of information, maybe if they were married or had gone through a legal divorce or whatnot, right? You can start to piece some things together through Ancestry.com and other sites. And so, you have to be kind of careful, because depending on the record on Ancestry, sometimes you're getting and this goes for other sites too, sometimes you're getting the actual document. And if you have any experience with this, sometimes you're getting what is basically some sort of summary of that document, whether that's a transcription or something that's fed into a database digitally. Okay, so you're not always getting the original document, but you can follow that information. And then, of course, you have to have some sense, and this could involve, depending on how old the person is, looking at census records. Let's see what Kathy says here. When my sister visited us for a week in September, she and I spent lots of time with Ancestry, my mom's pictures, articles, letters, etc. My sister has been using Ancestry for several years. And when you're doing any sort of genealogical research, the more information you have, the better. And that's what people know. That's, documents, pictures, articles, letters, right? So you can start to piece things together. So in this particular person that we found, part of that significantly was sort of tracing the path of location, marriage, legal divorce, those records, if they're out there, and if the records aren't out there, you might know about it. And then what ultimately happened is this person that we ended up being able to talk to, who, again, that person was significant to the missing person. Not sure if it's to what extent that will end up helping to solve the case, but utilizing that location and sort of path through marriages, legal marriages, and seeing ultimately leading to what a last name might have been for that person, which ultimately turned out to be we had it. And then, of course, we're using other websites to find that person and to make contact. And, and so that was very helpful. And so, again, when you're dealing with a missing persons case, okay, so you have the person who's gone missing, person or persons, then you have the people around them, whether it be family or friends, and so forth, right? And it may make sense, depending on the case, to be doing that extensive genealogical research. But the key is you want to have a sense of how much information you do have. My mom's mom wouldn't tell us hardly anything about her background, kept 98% of it a secret. Her Jewish mom emigrated from Germany in 1882. Wow, that's fascinating history. And when you start going down this path, Kathy and the others here, right? Once you learn more and you want to learn more and you want to learn more, and I have some examples of that. And let me mention some resources here. Of course, you see the ad campaigns, you've used it. Of course, it's ancestry.com. Okay. It is a paid service. There's not a lot that they're putting out free, although once in a while they do. That's obviously to get people there. I will say that if you're in if you have a library near you, whether you have access to a university library, or you are a community library, there's a chance they have researching on Ancestry is a lot like the research I did on my audit cases. Absolutely. You've got to follow the patterns, do the LaFord girl. As a Black person, it is very important to know my heritage. My aunt is really into, and the findings are fascinating. Absolutely. We know that, fortunately and unfortunately, so fortunately, we all have a connection culturally, ethnically, racially. That's an important aspect of genealogy. There are organizations and records pertaining to that. Unfortunately, through bad decisions by human beings to human beings, tragedies and so forth, we've had a raised awareness about certain groups, right? African American genealogy, Jewish genealogy, Native American genealogy, Native American Indian, and have had some greater awareness of the importance of that, and that's important. But we all have a story, and so the beautiful thing about genealogy is we all have a family, we all have a journey. We all have cultures that we bring to the table, but it also points to sort of some of the things that we all have in common too, right? And that's good to know. But yeah, very important. I agree 100%. Kathy LaForte, have you watched Finding Your Roots on PBS? Interesting show, yes. My longtime friend told me about this show a few months ago. It is fascinating. It is fascinating. Please keep chatting as I'm going on here. So Ancestry.com. So if you live near a library or a university library that you can have access to, there's a possibility that they have Ancestry Library Edition. And so if they do, and sometimes I think you have to use it on site. There may have been some exceptions to that during COVID, if I recall, but you basically can access it without paying the fee. Of course, there are, again, pending your budget and your decisions, right? If you have your own subscription. Now, I've mentioned before, we've talked about newspapers.com. They're connected to Ancestry. So if you join Ancestry on your own, you get some sort of access to newspapers.com. However, to get all of the benefits of newspapers.com, you have to also pay another fee. And so newspapers.com, and we've talked about it before, is an outstanding resource, not just for genealogy, but when you're dealing with researching family, again, missing persons cases or otherwise, having access to old media reports could be helpful, announcements, obituaries, special interest stories. Obviously, when you're getting into issues of crime or other notable incidents, right, can be helpful. Again, you have to make your own decisions on what you want to pay for and you don't. That Kathy, it is. I've seen a little bit of it. It's a great show. I probably should watch it more. I've watched some excerpts of it online. Another website that's good for newspapers. Again, you have to pay for it. Newspaperarchive.com. I posted the link. That's another one. Okay. So one area when you're keying in that's important for genealogy, obituaries, because obviously the obituaries talk some about a person's life, and then they may mention other people in their life and their spouses and their children and their children's children, or sometimes other family members or friends and some other interesting things. So if you're doing any sort of family history research for yourself or for a missing persons case, whomever you're researching in that case, if they've passed away or they've had a relative that passed away, if you can get your hands on an obituary, right, and then take notes and sort of go through that, and if anyone's had that or used that, please let me know here, right? That can certainly give you some paths, and I'll talk in a second here about just a path for me on that. Just the sort of crossover between amateur genealogy and missing persons. Another resource, and I'm not going to post anything about this here, but you can find it on your own, is specific cemeteries have websites. Now, the record keeping may vary, and but you'd have location information, historical information, but you might have to talk to someone there. Obviously, different sorts of cemeteries are going to have, public, private, are going to have rules to be respected. But chances are, especially nowadays, if you're interested in getting some grave records or verifying where someone's buried, that there's a website for that particular cemetery or set of cemeteries. Of course, if you're dealing with certain, sort of beyond the cemetery too, Um, there, for instance, in the case, and I'm Catholic, so I can know a little bit about this. If your, diocese have archives, and so now some materials might still be kept at churches, some might be kept at a diocesan archive. We're talking about baptismal records, marriage records, so forth. Now, there are rules and protocols for access, and that may vary by diocese. Okay, now, in terms of cemetery records, and I will post this, you might be familiar with findagrave.com. Now, you can search that without joining. There's obviously advertising on the site. Okay, that is what it is. But it's not every single, grave site is documented there, but there's material being posted there. Has anyone here used findagrave.com? Findagrave.com. Okay. It's one you might want to consider for sure. Another one I'll mention here, and this is from the Department of Veterans Affairs, is, we have these VA national cemeteries. Okay, let's go. Linda, I have not. Kathy, it's turning out that my mom's birth certificate was incorrectly recorded in New York City. Put her name on another girl's birth certificate in NYC for that birthday. This little girl died at 3. We do find, and I have found myself in different sorts of research, inaccuracies for various reasons, whether something was incorrectly recorded from the start or near to the start, and then sometimes just over time, the rendering or transcription. In fact, I have something in particular to mention here in a second. This is a government research here. If we have these VA cemeteries, veterans, the grave locator. So if perchance there's someone you're researching has something in one of those VA national cemeteries, you might be able to find information through that database I just posted. Let me say this, and this is a source of, and I need to deal with this with my own family research. Now, at present, on Ancestry.com, and this could be a very valuable resource, various people post family trees. Sometimes they're marked as private, sometimes they're open. A lot of times that information's been helpful. Sometimes for my research, it's been redundant on what I know, but I see it. I will occasionally reach out, no, more than occasionally when I do it, reach out to people. Say, hey, I'm this. I do not presently have that sort of tree posted on Ancestry.com. Maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll have to do something when I do the DNA in the DNA system. I have no idea. But I go through a lot of trees, and one of the things is there are at times when you're going through the trees that people post, and this is, I'm not heavy criticizing Ancestry because that's just the way the framework is. But there are inaccuracies, at least in my observation of family information of mine. Okay. Now, one reason why that gets replicated is because people are utilizing material from other people's trees to link through to their tree. So sometimes those same mistakes get replicated. Whether I ever set up a tree or not on Ancestry.com, through those communication channels, I do plan on, and although I've done a little of this without too much specificity, reaching out to those people and saying, hey, here's some inaccuracies specifically, and here's why. I want that information. I want their information to be accurate. Kathy, looking at other family trees can be very helpful. My sister has called a lot of people regarding our family tree and relatives. Absolutely. And whether you're seeing them on Ancestry or somewhere else on the net, networking is key. Networking is key. Even if you're doing research tied to a missing persons case, could be an avenue for collaboration. Right, for sure. Hey, if and again, Unfound brings value to the table. So this is not just about commercial promotion here. You're out there networking, you're researching a case, you see someone's interested in a case. There's nothing wrong with, hey, are you familiar with this episode, about, on Unfound about this case? I can tell you certainly it's something I've done at least once. So yeah, like with the disappearances, you have to weed out the inaccuracies. Absolutely. So that federal government grave locator is helpful. Government resources are important. I did and here's the search thread. I did a search of the term with quotes, genealogy, on USA.gov, USA.gov. That's a great resource in general. And you can see if you follow this string, a number of resources come up, including a page that USA.gov has, and it's toward the top, genealogy and family history. You can find that on your own in the search string. But there's a number of resources. Now, the nice thing about USA.gov, and remember, there are multiple pages to the search. So when you go down, click next, next, next. USA.gov, that's a great source. Right? That searches, of course, federal level resources. And then you'll see it might have state and local resources there too. Remember, and I think I said this early in our episodes. If I didn't, I'm saying it now. It's important to use Ancestry.com and some of the other big sites. But when you're just like doing any research, but when you're doing genealogical research, I can say for sure that you have to find those other sites, local level, state level, federal level. Of course, I'm not even getting into international level here. International, and you get into, provincial, town, city, and other places, right? Depending on your dexterity with foreign languages or translators or translating programs or Google Translate or whatever. But the point is that you have to be willing to go to those places other than Ancestry.com and others. But you also, you're going to need to rely on those big outlets. Government resources can be helpful. Archives, National Archives has some page that has some helpful information. Again, I'm going to post the link here. Again, sometimes when you find stuff on government websites, you might find the actual record. You might find some sort of index or transcription or summary too. But again, that's still information that you can follow. So even if something's not specifically available on the net, it's something that you might have to do an inquiry on, or it might lead to some sort of records request or Freedom of Information Act or state level open records request, or some other pathway. The key is really to create those pathways, right? For sure. So again, on those family trees, just like I said, you're going to see some inaccuracies. Likely, I know I have, but it is very helpful. And networking with people is helpful. That's the key. So we know about when people came to the United States. Obviously, there's the Ellis Island. And the Ellis Island, there is a search for that. I don't know if anyone has used that. You might have to join that one still. And then there's also Castle Garden, which was the Port of New York. This is a place, a series of this website basically has records, because it's not all about Ellis Island. And that's something I discovered a while ago, and I can't remember where I read that, probably multiple places. But once you start to realize, because you hear a lot about Ellis Island, but Ellis Island wasn't the only place. By the way, another thing that's helpful on these genealogy websites, Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org, which I'll get to in a second. Travel records. Of course, we're dealing with records of people who immigrated to the United States. or who traveled in and out of the United States. So that could also include people who were American citizens who did some travel. And I can tell you with at least one case, missing persons case, at least, and certainly just for dabbling, or more than dabbling at times, for certain persons in genealogy, looking at those travel records. And I'm talking about even people who were citizens but doing other traveling, flight, boat. And then certainly, of course, immigration records are going to be helpful for any sort of genealogical research. So there's your Ellis Island, Castle Garden. Again, if you've used those resources, let me know. Hopefully these are very helpful to you. The Library of Congress has some very good resources, and for research in general, but certainly they have materials that could be helpful for genealogy. Obviously, they have some interesting historical material regarding genealogy, whether you're related to it or not. You never know that when that might intersect into a missing persons case. I'm just giving some links there. They give some tips. They have some resources linked that's helpful. Their digital collections are helpful in a variety of ways. And in terms of newspaper, and you can click on your own when you're going to their digital communications, and we might have mentioned in a previous episode, they have the Chronicling America collection, newspapers. Oh boy, I don't remember the cutoff here now. It's fairly early in the century. Maybe it's working forward in time a little bit more now. But if you're using, newspapers.com, you're using some of the other sites, seeing what the Library of Congress has is helpful. Because again, when you're talking about researching family or someone else's family, right? There are death records, obituaries, marriage announcements. Back in the day, people, would be social columns. This person visited that person. Birth announcements, engagement announcements. Sometimes you get pictures, right? Sometimes you get pictures of people, right? That's helpful. And you never know what else interesting you might find about relatives, right? That's the interesting thing. Sometimes crimes or alleged crimes, and someone goes to trial, or maybe something happened to them, or someone was robbed, or so forth, right? You find these interesting things. So media searches, particularly newspaper searches, are relevant. If anyone has any other record types that they want to mention, that's important. Of course, census records are important. As of right now, we only have access up through, there it is. Kathy, we were on the same wavelength. As of right now, we only have comprehensive access to the census up through 1940. I do not remember off the top of my head right now when the 1950 census will be available. I know that those who are interested in genealogy in any way, professionally, amateur, so forth, are going to be on the edge of their seats. I remember back when the 40 census came out, that was the case. I was waiting and waiting. There were certainly things in my family that I wanted to look up when that happened. One of the things I was going to mention earlier, and I got off into a helpful sidetrack, was that, we have people who do genealogy professionally. They've been around pre-internet. Amateur genealogy has been around pre-internet. It's certainly grown. Obviously, with just the way that internet happens, and it's prompted freelancing and connections, and there are sites for this. People who might have really good amateur expertise might start doing a little freelancing, maybe even pick up some training. I'm not going to say it's not something I've thought about, or maybe tried to network a little bit about it, maybe even have done a little bit of, and have done just a little bit of of that. Nothing too extensive, but it's definitely some expertise if you have it. That I'm not saying what you should or shouldn't do, but I'm just saying that there are people now who are not necessarily full-fledged what we call professional genealogists, but are certainly doing some freelancing with their extensive knowledge, and also setting up channels and podcasts. And certainly something I think I mentioned in an earlier episode, right? If there was something I wanted to pursue more definitively, whether it intersects with cold case journalism or actually doing forensic genealogy, that would be something to consider pursuing. And I will say I continue to think about that more. But certainly in terms of studying and potentially solving these cases, it's very helpful. Again, if you have any resources to mention, please do. Another thing I want to suggest, and I'm not going to share anything now. Well, there's one I will. Okay, so you'll find, this is just by example, and I had used this site for some family history research of mine. But this is just one example, right? So you can find at the state level through museums, archives, academic endeavors, private funding, public funding, often, whatever, collaborations, right? And these places are digitizing. So I've just shared one that was just an example from Oklahoma, the Gateway to Oklahoma History, and right, so that is sponsored by Oklahoma Historical Society. This is digitized content. I'm not going to go into every detail, but I can tell you, for my own some family history research, I have two great uncles that moved west and had connections to Oklahoma and so forth. But you're going to find this sort of thing. So when I say, okay, you got to rely on Ancestry and the other big sites, you want to find your way into these state and local level sites too. And so whether it has to do with missing persons cases or just any sort of genealogical resource, that's just one example. I'm not going to go through every state here. You can do that on your own. But whether it's something you find on a .gov or a .org or a .edu, and I don't know, with the way the internet is nowadays, maybe even a .com, but that material is out there. And you're going to find things on those sorts of sites that you won't necessarily find on one of the big sites. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Another one, and I've mentioned this one before, fultonhistory.com. This site has, and this is mostly centered around state of New York, newspaper articles. You can search it. Once you get the hang of it, you got to kind of figure it out a little bit. But this page has historic newspaper articles. Okay, I guess it's not just New York. That's what I've seen mostly on there. You can figure that out on your own. But I've seen newspaper articles from state of New York on there that were very relevant to persons in my extended family history research. And so that's one I would suggest to get on your list. That's the fultonhistory.com, FULTON history.com. I've posted the link. So if you haven't used that site, try it out. I'm not saying it's going to be, whether you're looking at a missing persons case or you're looking at your own family history research. Let me, I want to give, I don't know if I'll get to both tonight, but I'll get to one example. So I had some great aunts, and I'm not going to get into full names here because some of the descendants are not that I couldn't do it right, but just for the sake of time. And who knows, maybe on my own outlet or another one of these episodes, I'll get into more name detail sometimes. I don't know, but let me just talk through it. So I had a great aunt on my dad's side, my grandfather's sister. So he had a couple sisters that traveled a bit and ended up in Pennsylvania, Ohio, maybe back and forth a little bit. So they were sort of missing, but not in the sense that someone necessarily reported them missing. But they were certainly missing to other people, out of touch. One in particular more often. Then over time, stories develop what happened to that person. And okay, maybe there was some communication. Remember, back in the early to mid 20th century, media communication wasn't moving as quickly. People had telephones, wrote letters. Families still had reasons more or less to stay in communication. But certainly by the time I was growing up, I remember this great Aunt Louise. People didn't know what happened to her. She was older than my grandfather. And, you heard some different stories about, how she might have passed away. I heard some different accounts of that. Well, I definitely kept it on and still keep it on my list to learn more, but I had a little bit of information about her from census records, from things that people said. Okay, she was in Ohio, Cleveland area maybe. And when I first started doing some genealogical research back in early to mid 2000s, I was able to gather a little bit of information. Now, I had one in particular, but a couple older cousins of my dad, older first cousins, who remembered her or remembered hearing things about her. And so I noted that, and those folks were very helpful. Unfortunately, they've passed away now, but very helpful in some recollections. And so I had that information, and eventually certain things get verified. For instance, and this was just researching sites, and I found not a big local paper, but a small local paper near where my grandfather's family grew up, and there were obituaries in that paper for my great grandparents. And of course, in that obituary, it's naming, relatives. What was in that obituary for my great Aunt Louise's last name, probably knew at that point. We knew at that point, or I knew, but it was, that ongoing corroboration and other things to think about. Well, as time went on, right, I found, she had been legally married ultimately at least once. That ended, and then did end up marrying some guy in Ohio, Cleveland area, someone who seemed a bit older. Okay, we kind of knew that. And then from that, from the 20s into the 30s, there were just some different accounts of what happened to her. To this day, I have seen no record that she had any children. But the question was, when did she die? I was able to see when her, what I would say most likely, the death record I've identified was probably that second husband in the Cleveland area in the early 1930s. It's the question of what happened next, which led me back to these other stories. Well, ultimately, and this is where census record came in, it was the 1940 census. I located a woman in that census in the Cleveland area that I think rightly presumed was my great aunt, based on some of the other information I had and where she was. But she was living there in what seemed to be a hotel or some building where a bunch of people were living. So then I'm thinking, okay. And at some point I got the idea, hey, in this section where she's listed with these other people on a list in the census, I started researching those other people. Part of it was, just to learn more about them. Could there be any networking possibilities? I know I had done a little research on the street that she and that guy lived on in 1930. I didn't have a lot of success in reaching anyone that would have remembered them at that time. And that was back in 2008, 9, 10, 11. We're talking 1930s and 40s here. But eventually what happened was I'm researching people on that list in that 1940 census. And all of a sudden, as I was researching one guy, I'm like, well, wait a second. And it was either in one of those posted family trees, and this is a case where it was helpful. It said, and it might have been it might have been, yeah, it was that he had a wife, Louise. And I'm like, wait a second. And whatever kind of record it was. But that's interesting. And I'm thinking, well, okay, that could be some sort of coincidence. Now, this was a second marriage for this guy, and his first wife had passed away. And I'm like, wait a second. So that opened up a whole new journey. Well, eventually over time, and I did some reaching out and talking to people and found a death record. This was not, I had to order it through wherever in Ohio. And based on the information on this death record for this Louise in the 1950s, and some other information I found through that Social Security, and it's not just that they have sometimes now on Ancestry, they have those Social Security records that include a little more about that rather than just the death and the number. And based on the information I had, I'm pretty confident that I, my great aunt died there in the 1950s and had married this guy after her second husband, their legal husband died. And so now in 1940, did they just meet? Now, of course, a lot more to learn. Did they just meet in that housing area in 1940? Had they met before it? When I found at least one of their names in a city directory. Those city directories on Ancestry can be helpful, and that's not the only place you can find them, but certainly Ancestry has them. And if any of you ever looked at those city directories, let me know. But I found the name, that new last name of hers, and so I pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, have corroborated enough that was her. Looking at her death record of this woman and linking and comparing it to information about my great aunt. As far as I'm concerned, I found her. Now, there's a lot more information. There's a lot more story to tell. I don't know if there's no one alive now that I'm aware of that would know anything about her, as far as I know. Doesn't seem like she ever had any children. I've certainly tried to communicate with people who are related to other people that she's passed through in her life, but that doesn't mean they know anything about her other than a name, and so forth. Okay, so the census record, the 1940 census record, was very helpful there. Just going back over it and say, these people that she's living with in 1940. Now, she was born in the 1890s. She's older than my grandfather. Research those people. There was no guarantee I'd find a connection, but it seems to be the case. Okay, let me see here. I want to keep going. I have mentioned FamilySearch.org. This is pretty much a free website. If you've used FamilySearch.org, let me know. They do now require, and this has been going on for a while, they do now require membership, but it is free. It's clearly pretty open about that, run by the Mormons. You don't have to be a Mormon to use it. Obviously, as we know, the Mormons have, again, if you're Mormon, you can clarify, but they have a particular way in which genealogy loops into theology for them. But the site's a public resource, okay? If anyone used FamilySearch.org, let me know. Okay, but you do have to join. Okay, but they do have a lot of records. Some of it's redundant with Ancestry, some not. Okay, Kathy, you never know, though. My sister was able to talk to a maternal relative of ours. We didn't know whose mom had a picture from 1910 of my grandma and her mom from Germany and New York City. That's awesome. In fact, Kathy, you remind me, when I was doing this research on my great aunt Louise, there was a guy I networked with who was, related to this later guy she was legally married to, most likely. And he's this guy I talked to, genealogy expert, really into amateur genealogy, runs a website or a blog, some about it. Okay, he actually has a picture that of his relative, right? This third guy of my great aunts that might be her in the picture. We haven't determined that for sure because I haven't seen enough pictures of her, maybe none, when I'm sorting through some old pictures I have. But it might be the case that this picture that he has is of with my great aunt. So of course this guy never knew her, but his relative, seemingly was married to my great aunt, and this picture he has could be with her in it. So you never know what you're going to find. You never know what you're going to find. In fact, if I ever do, whether it be through one of my own outlets or one of these episodes or a genealogy thing, and I do go through this with more detail or more names, I will give this guy I'm talking about credit, but I can tell you he was very helpful. And yes, that picture might be of my great aunt, to be determined. You just never know. Yeah, that's great material. In terms of resource sites, Cindy's List, been around for a while. CYNDISLIST.com. A lot of resources on there. I'm not going to get into it in detail. I would bookmark it. It's been around for a long time. One of the things about genealogy on the net is sorting through things that are paid, sorting through things that are free, sorting through things that might have some sort of mixed approach. Okay, so I would keep in mind Cindy's List. I'm also going to mention it's a go-to for me, journaliststoolbox.org, right? There's a page there of miscellaneous resources. Of course, that's run by the Society of Professional Journalists. That miscellaneous list does have some sites in there that could help with family history research. There might be other categories that have it. You can look on that on your own. They have that big categories list on the left. You can also search the site. I mentioned that site so much. Part of the approach to this that I've found over the years, and admittedly, I'm not the most organized person, but when I'm pushing forward, I'm pushing forward. I've made some pretty significant discoveries on my own family history research, and I will say that skill set has helped me, particularly in thinking through some cold cases, particularly one or two missing persons cases. There are several comprehensive Jewish record resources too. They keep great records, as do the Mormons. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to. Okay, so there's different resources out there for African American genealogy, Native American genealogy, Jewish genealogy. So Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org. You'll find government sites, history societies, particularly tied to groups. And again, those might be really small, those might be large. I would also say, and this is a whole nother area, and it could be pertinent to a missing persons case to the extent that there are international implications, right? So you're seeing more and more material in Europe and other parts of the world. Now, of course, sometimes you run into the language barrier depending upon your dexterity with language. And then, of course, you can say Google Translate or whatever, but, try that as it goes. But international records are significant, for sure. I can tell you another story. We still have a little bit of time. So that same family, my Louise, great Aunt Helen, her sister. So again, that was one that maybe folks kept in touch a little bit more. She was also born before my grandfather. And, but again, she fell off the radar, maybe not as much as Louise. Also spent a good bit of her time in Ohio. I knew some things about her. I had learned some things about her by talking particularly to some of the same first cousins of my dad that I mentioned who were older. And that obituary of my great grandparents, again, helped corroborate one or two things. And again, I discovered family, cousins, when I finally found, and part of it was just reaching out to people and looking in records. And again, there were some inaccuracies in the records that were there, and it might have been intentional at times, okay. But I found that family. We had communicated. It corroborated some things I heard. Very interesting material. But they had said, okay, here we go. Ship records. Yes. Those are Kathy, those are very difficult to read at times. The writing can be difficult. Sometimes people are rendering things they hear in a way like, oh, what does that sound like? Or sometimes it is in another language. But those ship records are a great source for sure. So with regard to this great aunt, Helen, these folks said, hey, we think there was a half sibling, from a previous relationship. And it seemed to be more from her than the guy she married. So that set me on a whole nother journey. Of course, I was trying to get information out of them. What do you know? What do you know? And that was helpful. And again, I had to go back and look through, and I knew some things about my great aunt and some things about the family in general, and they were sometimes using different last name. Good thinking, Kathy. Linda, my cousin used those to find out we came over on the Mayflower. Wow, that's interesting. So again, looking at marriage records, census records, old newspapers, city directories, I finally found someone who wasn't a blood relative or not even directly related by marriage, but the first guy that my great aunt Helen at least had a legal marriage record with, notwithstanding some inaccurate information on it, possibly intentionally. She had two children. Two, not one. It turned out to be two. She had left them when they were young. So there were actually two half siblings. And yes, over time I've made, communicate. And I've learned that from someone who ended up marrying that first guy later, but he kind of knew about her and was the one that explained some things to me. And he's still alive. But that was interesting. And yes, I have connected with those relatives. And that's where the internet can be helpful. Social media, websites, whether it's email, phone, social media, Facebook, whatever, you can connect with people. And if you're civil, diplomatic, professional, whatever term you want to use, most people will talk to you. This is the sort of material that could be helpful for, again, pertaining to missing persons cases. By the way, this is something that we mentioned a long time ago. Google News Archive. Again, from what I understand, it's not really maintained anymore, but it is another source for older newspapers. Okay. Here's another good resource. Bureau of Land Management, Federal Land Records site. Of course, Kathy, I know you know a lot about government records, to the extent that overlap with taxes and finances. But you think about it, there's and I'm no expert on land records, and it's probably something I should get to know more. But that's one I'd recommend. Of course, other than genealogy, that's something that could overlap with a missing persons case in other ways. Remember, we've talked about land, location, place, etc., culture with regard to missing persons cases. Remember those episodes with the material that was helpfully provided by Natasha, and then we talked more about. We've been going through our guiding questions tonight without necessarily saying them. What is genealogical research? What does it entail? What does genealogical research entail? How can it help with missing persons cases? If anyone wants to give any thoughts on that, please. And then what are some resources for genealogical research? Someone mentioned C.C. Moore. And so I'm going to see if she has a website. While we're doing this. And she does. And this is C.C. Moore, genetic genealogist. And so I'm going to post that because one or a few of you mentioned that. And I have not looked at that closely, but of course we have a good group here, so something we can add to the list. But I'll continue. One thing also is when you're doing research, go ahead and again, account for maiden names. I can say that, you got great-grandparents, grandparents, great-aunts, great-uncles, parents, grandparents, okay, so forth. Track those maiden names. And of course, depending upon the nationality or ethnicity, those are going to be more or less difficult to find. Okay, it says C.C. Moore has a Facebook page where you can see what cases she have helped to solve using DNA. Let me see if she has that linked on her I'm going to look on Facebook real quick and see if we can find that, because this is a resource that you guys are sharing. And so if she's actually genetic genealogist. So let me see what we got here. Right, so found it. Tell me if this is the page. It looks to be the page that she's intending to do this. I'm posting it here. You decide yourselves, folks, whether you want to follow it or not. It does look like a resource. Tell me if that's the Facebook page, Linda, that you're referring to. It does look like she has this important post. This is something now I'm definitely going to keep up on. Again, folks, great job on information sharing. Okay, very helpful. Here's a site I had bookmarked, maybe used a little bit, and I'm now going to use more. Thank you, Linda. This seems to be something that this genealogyindexer.org, I have to look into this more. It looks to have mostly international, looks European, but it might not be completely. Certainly has some Jewish genealogy in it. Genealogyindexer.org. So again, I'm just created, and I'm going off its about page, August 2008. And it might be predominantly Jewish genealogy or international and or I just don't know. I had it bookmarked. And the thing about with a lot of these sites that pertain to specific ethnic, national, racial, geographic areas, whether what you're researching is directly intertwined with that or not, right? Just the nature of human life and cultures, there's crossover points, proximity. So it always helps to have these resources, right, bookmarked or in your toolbox. You just never know what you can see in publications. And by the way, in family history research, whether it's locational or ethnic or whatever, I've seen that, even if you're not directly connected to a specific group or area. It's part of that is building that big picture, right? Whether you're researching one or more persons tied to a missing persons case or your own family, right? You got to have those tools in mind. Okay, so that's one. I'm going to get back to that. I'm excited to do this episode. This is such an area. So I was going back through material that I've used over the years, and so it's time to revisit this. I know in 2022, even for my own amateur genealogy, there's some things I need to get back to, and also too, as I just intensify some work pertaining to some cold cases. Again, these genealogical resources are going to be helpful, and thanks for sharing this this material, CC Moore. I'm going to definitely keep up on what she's doing. Thanks for that. And if anyone has any other resources, please share them. This is another site that's been for a while, Steve Morse, STEVEMORSE.org. This has a variety of records. He is listing, indexing, possibly containing, hosting. I don't remember any details. It's been a while since I used the site. It does have some things on there that are free, some that are going, when you go to it, are going to be not free. But he has ways of searching through things, even if they're from other sites, and organizing them in tips. So that's stevemorse.org, STEVEMORSE.org. I've posted that. That's a resource. Yeah, Parabon. That I noticed that on the Facebook page. And she says that is, and I saw that post on there where she's talking about, I'm just going to put this here too, since you guys have mentioned it. Okay, it looks to be, and I'm just going to the About page. Okay. Yep. Wow. Okay. I don't know much about it. Again, I'm just taking a look at it. Looks to be that she's that scientific dimension is somehow tied to DNA. Don't know a lot about this, and obviously the therapeutics and the medical, and not going to navigate into that discussion. And again, like I said, we're not necessarily endorsing any particular commercial, political, philosophical, and/or religious perspective here, but for the sake of discussion in terms of how it intersects with forensic genealogy, I'm posting it. You can assess that. But her work looks really interesting, so I appreciate that. Again, we have a little bit more time, so if anyone has any other resources they want to share. I had this in my list. This has a ton of, this is genealogicalstudies.com. They have a whole list of links that could be helpful for genealogy and other sorts of research, which certainly could be relevant to missing persons cases. And that is the National Institute for Genealogical Studies. You can go to their main page on your own and read up about it. And so as I was saying, track those maiden names. Carrie, welcome. That's okay. Hello, everyone. First opportunity to make it. Welcome. Late, but homework is done. I've posted a number of our suggested sources and some news and opinion references that we've mentioned earlier. They're there in the chat. They'll be available. Carrie, if you have anything you want to suggest, we have a little bit of time left in terms of good sites or guides for genealogy. One I want to mention too, and again, Kathy, I know you're knowledgeable about this. I mentioned sort of those federal land records, but those county level property searches. Of course, I think a long time ago on these episodes talked about that, right? So county level, generally, every state, every county has different protocols, laws, policies, but nowadays, much of that you can search on the net. Of course, you can still go down the old-fashioned ways to the courts or the city county buildings and get that information too. But hey, if you have information in terms of deed searches and property tax and ownership transfers. And of course, there are ways to get this for residential and commercial properties. Also, another thing, you can do your own searches. And this is helpful for not just genealogy, but for general research, particularly missing persons cases or cold cases could be helpful. States have, through one or more government entities at the state level, business searches. Hello, Carrie. If that's right, you're not able to post a link. Carrie, if you could either send me through Facebook or email what you want to post, I can do it. So I'll pull up Facebook and I'll pull up my email if you want to send something to me. Okay. We have a few more minutes, so if you want to do that, you can send that. I'll look for it. Those county level land records, right? So, I was talking about the state level databases. So if you are looking into someone who might have been an owner of a business or somehow involved in a business, right? And every state has different, levels of what they have, and it goes back in time. Sometimes there are documents available. Sometimes they're summaries or transcriptions, but that could be helpful too. So we got the county level databases on property records. We have state level databases on businesses, business activity. And again, I know, Kathy, this is material you're familiar with. Okay, for sure. Okay, let me look here, Carrie. Let's see what we got. Am I looking on email or Facebook? Let's see here. Carrie, am I looking on email or Facebook? Okay, I'll give it. I'll say. So while I'm looking into this, if I'm looking into this, I'll just wait and see what we got here. Okay, so is it okay? I'm looking on Facebook. And I'm not seeing it, Carrie. Okay, I'm looking. If you can send that, and I'll go to our. Okay, and maybe it's running a little slowly. That might be the problem. It might be a Facebook thing. So let's give that a few minutes. If anyone has any other materials you want to send before we conclude, please do that. I've covered. We've talked a lot of good resources and connections. If there's anything you want to, and I'm going to hang in there for this, Carrie. I'm not going to rush. And so here we go. There it is. Yes. Find a grave. Yes. Got it. We did mention that. I'm going to put it up again. You want to talk a little bit about any of your experiences with Find a Grave? Carrie, you can chat there now, not on Facebook, but in the YouTube chat. Got it. I got it. We're back to Find a Grave, which we talked a little bit about. Any experiences you want to mention in terms of how it might relate to genealogy in general or with respect to a missing persons case? It's a great resource. I'll give you a moment to do that. So while we're waiting, if Carrie wants to type anything. So again, folks, family trees on Ancestry can be helpful. Be cautious, at times there are inaccuracies, but that's how it goes. Obituaries, helpful. Marriage records, death records. At times, if you can find those legal divorce records. Census records. Again, the 1940 census at the federal level is what we have. I do not remember off the top of my head when the 1950 census will be available. Carrie, I've used it for looking up, and by it we're talking about find a grave, family information, have found obits there. Yes, people post or link information there, as well as to see if someone has been buried in connection to cases. Absolutely. It's definitely one to keep on the A list. Right. And again, I also mentioned, folks, if there's particular cemeteries that you're keying in on, you can see if those cemeteries have websites. And of course, when you're on Find a Grave, they have they have the names of the cemeteries. Now, depending on the cemetery, they may or may not have all the information for the cemetery, but you might be able to find that elsewhere. So it's helpful regardless. By the way, you'll also find on Ancestry, probably, and certainly maybe on FamilySearch.org, and then certainly you can find it elsewhere. States had census activity. Those will vary in what you can find. So when you're keying in on a region, look for those state level census records. Travel records, again, we've mentioned. Don't forget also that Ancestry.com has the loop into the yearbook database. I do not remember how far back it goes or how far forward it goes. Has anyone through Ancestry seen the yearbooks? Okay, now remember, with a lot of these searches, people with common names that are common, right? You have to sort through with years, middle initials, middle names. Obviously, names that are more unique, that makes it a little easier, but even there, you have to be sure. Corroboration. But that just like the city directories, and again, sometimes you can access the actual image of the directory or at least some transcription or summary, but also the yearbooks. And again, on Ancestry too, in those, if the family tree information is public, people also post pictures or upload pictures. Sometimes if people have private trees, you can communicate with them. You could request access to the tree and network with people. What am I missing? Anything else anyone wants to suggest? This has been a very fruitful discussion. And again, with all these things dealing with government, they're different, depending on what they hold in terms of protocols, procedures, policies, laws. As always, I'm not a lawyer and we're not giving legal advice. But spend time researching. It's going to be a lot of fun if you're doing it on your own. It's a great, just like history in general, though, let's keep this in mind, right? You're whether it's amateur genealogy for your family or you're looking into a missing persons case or some sort of cold case or anything, right? You're going to learn, there's going to be things that are, positive and negative. History, it is what it is. That's part of the learning. I can certainly tell you things I've learned in terms of my own family history that are what they are. And certainly if you're researching certain missing persons cases, you're going to learn things that would be quite relevant to that case, but, are going to be mixed in terms of perspectives and positive and negative. But the key is to document. Corroboration's key. It's an adventure, though. It's an adventure. So we've covered a lot of good ground. Don't forget the unfoundpodcast.com, which I did post earlier. This episode will be available publicly weeks in front of us after we get the next one ready to go. Appreciate everyone's participation tonight. Let's see here. Kathy, in September, when my sister was here, she found another family tree that had posted one of the exact same photos my grandma kept. Again, that's the sort of finding that I'm talking about. You just never know. Kind of as you indicated earlier, Kathy, you never know. Stay organized. Branch out in terms of you're doing your research. I know one thing I need to do is be more organized. I got files, I got notes, I got bookmarks on computer, I got emails with people, I got probably emails to myself. I need to do a better job of staying organized. But if you can key in on certain people and certain events and certain dates, and then names, and then build out, and even when you're networking with people, and again, let's go back to our discussion about building sources, human sources, right? Human sources. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to contribute before we wind down? This has been a spectacular. Again, we're just so thankful for the folks participating. Okay, so thank you, everybody. This has been Unfound on the Ground number 16, Genealogical Research for Missing Persons Cases. Carrie, organization is key, and so is time saving. Boy, I've learned that. And then I always look back and say, if I was more organized, I would have saved more time and been more productive. So certainly one of my goals in 2022, whether it's my own genealogy or cold case work or life in general, is staying more organized for sure. A binder factory, Carrie. I have so many of them. Yeah, that would be a good investment for sure. We're not giving investment advice, folks. Just a humor there. But yeah, that's funny. So this has been Unfound on the Ground number 16, Genealogical Research for Missing Persons Cases. Keep doing what you're doing, folks. The Unfound brand, the Unfound platform, doing great work. Again, I forgot to mention, boy, I take it for granted, right? Eric Grabowski, I'm part of a small part of the assisting team at Unfound. I've been a guest on Unfound once. Been honored to be working with the team on this program. Please do, Carrie, and future episodes, folks, never hesitate to update and say, hey, on a previous episode, this could be helpful. Family history research. I learned how much time I saved by being organized. This is Carrie. I kept looking up the same information all the time. Yeah. Sometimes it's good to corroborate and reinforce, but redundancy is not always helpful. That's true. So as I always say, folks, someone out there knows something or knows someone who knows something. Have a great week, folks. Thank you for a great episode, and be well. I'm now ending the live stream.